The Horror, a river so polluted that its contents had caught on fire. In June of 1969, the Cuyahoga River had become a new reason to keep our environment clean for good. The environmental movement truly began in the early 20th century, with the idea that the industrial boom, according to respected historian Benjamin Klein, had eroded the purity of the American soul and the simple values of the past. Preservationists built off this ideology and focused on saving the environment for its beauty and aesthetic. Fast forward a decade, and high levels of manufacturing during the First and Second World Wars hit the environment hard. A surge in environmental disasters, as well as an increase in personal activism, shed light on the severity of the environmental problem. During the 1970s, environmentalists focused on how the lack of preservation affected daily life and took social and legislative action to combat pollution, problems created by disposal of toxic waste, ozone depletion, and global warming. Furthermore, ecologists stressed the extent to which humans impacted the Earth's ecosystem and how it was necessary for individuals to take measures to preserve the planet. The increasing investment in environmental issues during the 1970s truly sought to make the Earth a cleaner place for generations to come. Due to the civil rights and anti-war movements during the 1960s, political activism had culturally become increasingly popular. This culture persisted into the 70s, and Americans, particularly white men and women, became increasingly involved in environmental politics. On April 22, 1970, the first Earth Day was celebrated to raise awareness of environmental hazards such as pollution and disposal of waste. Organized by Wisconsin Senator Gaylord Nelson, Earth Day had more than 20 million American participants, as well as 10,000 schools and 1,500 colleges. This outright increase in political activism led to an increase in participation through mediums such as newspapers. Teach-ins, for example, were held to allow the public to express their views on harmful pollutants of air and water, as well as chemicals, solid waste, and even noise. These teach-ins focused on offering solutions to reduce threats on the environment and educate the public on rising environmental concerns. Newspapers across the country endorsed these events, and the Chicago Tribune, for example, was said to have listed 30 teach-ins in 1970 alone.
In 1962, Rachel Carson published her novel, Silent Spring, which particularly focused on warning the general public of certain environmental crises that were crippling this great nation. She emphasizes that the main issue contributing to pollution and global warming, among other environmental concerns, includes the use of toxic chemicals such as DDT. In her novel, Carson states that we have to choose between two roads, one where we consistently take the easy route, arriving at our destination much more quickly, but always encountering disaster in the end. The other road is the answer to all of our environmental struggles, a path where we could begin rebuilding and working towards preserving our Earth in the long run. For decades, this book has been referred to as one of the most influential catalysts that helped spark the environmental movement in the 1970s. As a result, many groups began to join in the movement in an attempt to affect environmental change in the US and even other countries as well. Greenpeace, for example, is a non-governmental organization founded in 1971 that sought to pursue environmental change in the midst of the movement. Their main goals include saving the Arctic, protecting our forests, fighting global warming, preserving our oceans, living toxic-free, promoting sustainable agriculture, and last but not least, defending democracy. An inclusive and people-powered program, Greenpeace strives to use peaceful protest in order to advocate for environmental change and raise awareness on a number of global environmental issues, not only in the US. In addition to personal activism, by roughly 1969, Congress began passing specific legislation throughout the 1970s, further reducing a number of environmental concerns in the US. In 1970, Congress passed the Clean Air Act, guaranteeing the protection and enhancement of air resources, so as to encourage public health and safety. This piece of legislation intended to facilitate the development of programs that sought to prevent air pollution, which was essentially the primary focus of this act. Moreover, this legislation significantly improved the level of greenhouse gases that were emitted by vehicles. Take a look at this graph. As the number of miles traveled by vehicles increased from 1 trillion miles in 1970 to roughly 3.25 trillion in 2015, the VOC emissions, which stand for volatile organic compounds, decreased dramatically from around 14 grams per mile to less than 1 gram per mile. In addition, this graph demonstrates the drastic change in air quality from 1980 to 2008, with a decrease in levels of nitrous dioxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and lead, all representing some of the most harmful greenhouse gases. In addition, the Clean Water Act of 1972 was passed, which effectively sought to limit pollution in waters so as to promote safe environments where people could both fish and swim in, and where sea animals could thrive in a less harmful habitat. The establishment of a pollutant discharge permit system and construction of water treatment plants were different solutions intended to eliminate the discharge of pollutants and excess waste into navigable waters. Here, you can clearly see the various forms of pollution and other reasons that have impaired our waters, including the oxygen depletion, mercury deposits, as well as oil and grease. Thus, these reasons incited the need for legislation such as the Clean Water Act to further protect these areas of our environment. Not only were the Clean Air and Clean Water Act passed in the early 1970s, but there were various other forms of legislation enacted from the late 1960s to mid-1970s, such as the Occupational Health and Safety Administration in 1970, as well as the Safe Drinking Water Act in 1974.
Today, the environmental movement is still in full stride. Renowned organizations such as Greenpeace continue to take action to spread awareness and pass legislation around the world. In addition, personal activism continues to play a large role in the progression of the movement. For example, in June of 2015, activists, appropriately referred to as the Seattle Kayaktivists, attempted to prevent a large Shell oil rig from departing to the Arctic for drilling. Just last year, a group of high school students filed a lawsuit against the Obama administration for failing to protect the environment for future generations. Significant legislative action in favor of the environmental movement has been enacted as well. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, within the last few years, since roughly 2012, the government even began to regulate vehicle pollution. The EPA and the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration have worked to set greenhouse gas standards for vehicles, which have cut America's oil consumption by 12 billion barrels and reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 6 billion metric tons. Recently, in the 2016 election cycle alone, it has become apparent that conservatives do not view the environmental issue as a true problem. Dating back to the 1970s, many conservatives stressed the importance of balance, and often revealed how many environmental projections were exaggerated. Despite this opposition then and now, the movement continues to evolve in order to protect and sustain the environment for generations to come.